Paul, thank you so much for that kind introduction, and thank you for everyone who is joining us today. I'm glad that everyone was able to make it. So I guess here what I'll do is kind of, as Paul said, share my story and my journey and what I'm doing now and how that kind of even relates and helps support my recovery. So yeah, and then we'll get into some questions. So I mean, if you have any questions, you can hold them to the end and we'll make sure to get to all of them. Well, great. So I'm Jordan. Right now, I'm 23 years old, have over 5 years in recovery and sobriety. I got sober on December 9th, 2018, 2 weeks before my 18th birthday. But I think we should backtrack a little bit, or maybe even a lot from that. Ever since I was a little boy, my parents and my mom, who is on this Zoom right now, who is also in recovery for a lot longer than I've been, kind of told me about my family's history with alcoholism in particular. I remember hearing about my great grandmother struggling with alcoholism, my grandfather, my mom, a lot of members of my family. And so that was something that when I was young, I had kind of in the back of my mind as something that was prevalent, and I guess that I had to look out for. But ever since I was little, I remember having this odd feeling that I was somehow the same. I could feel, people call it the addictive personality, which can obviously develop into the disease of addiction with prolonged drug use and drug abuse. But I've always had that. When I was a little kid, I loved candy, and I guess that's not that unusual, and I still do. But I had all these things kind of in my life where I would take it to extremes. I always loved staying up really, really late. In high school, I would stay up super late till like 3 a.m. very regularly. And that can happen to a lot of people. That doesn't necessarily mean you're going to go down one path or another, but it was kind of just, I guess, a signal to me that I took things in extremes. It was always kind of all or nothing for me. And that is very much my personality even to this day. But where things really started was in the beginning of high school for me. The way I tell it, the first time I used any substance, which was marijuana, it was kind of something out of a movie almost. I was working over the summer. I think it was the summer in between my freshman year and my sophomore year of high school. I was, I guess, interning for a very small music festival that was being held in Connecticut. And I guess I should say that I'm a Connecticut native. I was raised in Connecticut and lived there for, I guess, around 18 years. And I was interning for this music festival. And when the festival kind of came time to put it on, I remember going to the back of the festival, and there was this tent that was set up. And I went inside the tent, and people were smoking marijuana, playing the acoustic guitar, and kind of passing a joint around in a circle. And I was significantly younger than most of the people there. But I thought, do you know what? I'm just going to try this. I had really no knowledge about anything regarding marijuana other than you were supposed to feel good from smoking it. I don't really remember receiving any serious education about it, about the harms, about what it does to you, the side effects, all those kinds of things. I didn't even realize it was addictive at the time. And I didn't really feel much from that kind of first use, but I kept kind of pursuing it. And over time, over, I guess, maybe the coming months, I smoked a few more times. And really what got me into regular use was something that I think we see very typically across a lot of young people. It's your friends, right? The people who you trust most, the people who you think might be making good decisions, the people who you want to impress and seem cool around. And so I had a friend who, is a good guy, was a good guy. We're not close anymore, but always was a really nice kid, had an older sister, and I think she probably introduced him to marijuana, and he started using it early on in high school. And now for reference, also, I went to boarding school. So I was kind of splitting time in high school in New Hampshire and in Connecticut. And so it was really started when I was at home in Connecticut with that friend over summers and over breaks and things like that. So I started using with my friend, and it became every time I went over there. We used to only play video games or stay up late and watch scary movies, but it really quickly turned into every time I went over there, I was seeking out smoking marijuana. Along the way, which I think is something that a lot of people probably can relate to, there were probably warning signs that I should have followed or thought about, but someone with, that kind of addictive traits might want to ignore that. So for example, something really early on that happened was I was at my friend's house and there were maybe 5 other guys there. It was one of the first times that I started using marijuana, and I had no idea about how strong it was, about what forms of using it, like the concentrates, the dabs, the pen, the vape pens, things like that. I had no idea that that was really a lot stronger. So before I knew it, I realized that I wanted to be cool in front of these people, these guys, right? I wanted to do as much as they did. I wanted to be perceived as being able to keep up. So I used a significant amount of marijuana, like 5 hits of the vape pen. And this is one of my first times using several hits of a bong and bowls and joints and things like that. And I ended up, my face turned white as a ghost, totally white. And I ended up passing out on the front porch, right? I fainted. Everything kind of turned to black. People tried to get me up and I came to. And soon I went home, and I had 2 other friends that were going to sleep over at my house. And I was at the dinner table with them and with my parents, and I literally basically fell asleep at the dinner table. I was almost incoherent. I didn't really know what was going on. Probably should have been a warning sign that I was going way too fast, way too quickly. But I said, you know what, maybe I won't do that again. I was sick for days. But I tricked myself into thinking, well, I guess that probably just won't happen again. I learned my lesson. I should still probably keep doing this anyway. So that story kind of kept going on. And over time, slowly, right, that use, the level of use and the frequency of use kept increasing. And it was really every single time, and it really, the first, I guess, really, really negative impact interpersonally that happened to me from my marijuana use was the altering of that friendship. And this is something that I'll get into that is a lot more prevalent kind of later in my story. But that friendship with that friend became transactional pretty instantly, starting regularly using marijuana, right? I knew that because he was my friend, he would give it to me for free. I wouldn't have to pay him to use his stuff. And because I liked it so much, I would start seeking out, hanging out with him more and more and more just to be able to get that for free. It stopped being because I liked the kid so much, and it started being primarily for that. So that was kind of the first, I guess, really negative impact that either consciously or subconsciously, I'm not even sure, that happened to me. Then I went to school. I got introduced to drinking alcohol, as a lot of kids do as well. I did that, but my, I guess, drug of choice, you could say, really was marijuana. I still at that point didn't really understand high potency THC. I didn't understand the vape pens, even though really it was the vape pens that I was using, right? That was the stuff, the carts, as people call them, is the primary way in which I used marijuana. And that's really common among kids today because it's very potent. You don't have to use a lot of it to, it's, I guess, a bang for your buck, you could say, if you're a marijuana user. And also you can hide it really easily, right? It doesn't smell. You can wave it away. You can hide it under your bed. You can hide it in a drawer and no one's really going to notice. And so that became really not the only, but I'd say 90% of the time what I would be using. So then kind of jumping forward a little bit in time, maybe a year or 2 in the future, it was the kind of late winter and early spring of my junior year in high school. And at this point, my marijuana use really, really accelerated. And you can be able to tell by the timeline. So that would have been early in 2018. And if you remember in the beginning, I said that my sobriety date was in December of 2018. So this happens about over the course of a year, a little bit less than a year. And the really kind of scary thing is the downward spiral and how quickly that happened and can happen to people, especially young people. So I started using marijuana a lot more frequently, sometimes at school, all the time when I was at home during breaks. And it really reached started going very rapidly towards a climax in that summer of 2018. I was interning for a campaign on a state Senate campaign. And at that time, I kind of remember consciously thinking one day at the beginning of that summer, I was feeling anxiety going through things like that, as a lot of teenagers do. And I remember thinking, the world is a lot quieter. The kind of sound of the world is quieted down every time that I'm intoxicated, every time that I'm high. So if I feel good when I'm high, if my anxiety is reduced when that happens, well, why wouldn't I want to do that all the time? Why wouldn't I want to feel this way all the time? Why wouldn't anyone want to feel this way all the time? That was a very logical thing to me. And it took me a long time to realize that the majority of people don't really process substance use that way, that's actually abnormal. And in a way, it still almost doesn't make sense to me, because that's how I am as a person. But I've obviously learned a lot through my work and through my recovery. So I was going to work high, regrettably, I was driving under the influence, one of the most dangerous things you can do. And that's one of my bigger regrets. Thankfully, I didn't have any accidents, but that's just, a major stroke of luck. A lot of people, kill themselves, kill others in accidents driving while intoxicated, and especially off marijuana. A lot of people don't think that you can, that it's impairing or that it's dangerous to drive under the influence of marijuana, but it certainly is. It's just like alcohol. My use kind of kept escalating. To give you an anecdote of something that happened, over that period of time, that kind of, I guess, a couple things to demonstrate the insanity of addiction is two stories I'll tell you. So one, I had a friend earlier in high school. I did a program where I went to Spain, and I stayed with a family over the course of a few months, and I really bonded with the family, still very close with them to this day. My host brother over there, his name is Hugo. A summer or two after that trip to Spain, he actually came to visit us in America, and he stayed at my house in Connecticut with us. I don't know, maybe for a week or two. So Hugo was at my house. I ran out of my own supply of marijuana for one night. I had been used to using it every single night before I went to sleep. And I didn't even think I could go one night without using it. So I developed this plan in the middle of the night, basically. My parents, I think, took away my phone, actually. So I didn't have a phone. But Hugo had two phones, one that had like a SIM card from America and one that had a SIM card from Spain, but he was connected to the Wi-Fi in both, so he could use both in the house. So I said, Hugo, give me one of your phones. I'm going to reach out to one of my friends who can drop something off in the middle of the night, like a vape, in the mailbox. And what we're going to do is 1 or 2 in the morning, we're going to stay up and wait for that to happen. And what I told him to do was go into the bathroom next to my parents' bedroom, and while I would go downstairs to the front door, and I would text him when to flush the toilet and turn on the sink in the bathroom to create a noise cover to prevent my parents from hearing me opening the front door and running outside. And then I would tell him to do it again when I retrieved it and was about to open the door again, just so I could use marijuana that night. Right? Totally insane, totally abnormal. I thought that this was totally fine, that there was no problem with this. I saw no issue with concocting such a bizarre plan just to be able to use a substance that single night. Another thing that would happen, and this would particularly happen when I didn't have marijuana, what I would do is I would drink alcohol, right, kind of to replace that intoxicated feeling. This happened many times. I would be home and I would sneak down into the basement where there was alcohol. My dad drinks alcohol, but very regularly, a glass of wine with dinner every once in a while, never has had a problem. So there was a bunch of old kind of hard liquor in the basement. I would sneak down in the middle of the night and basically drink out of the bottle. I say I really haven't even taken a shot in my life. I don't even know how much that is, because I would just drink from the bottle. And I would say, okay, I've had enough. I'm going to go back upstairs. And I would tell myself, I'm going to stop here. I'm going to be responsible. I'm not going to get super drunk alone, because that's bad. And I'm going to make sure I hold myself accountable by sneaking back up my creaky basement stairs, because I know I'm not going to want to come back down again. I know I'm not going to want to risk my parents hearing me sneaking down to the basement in the middle of the night. So this is a foolproof plan for me to prevent myself from going to get more. Well, in the course of a single night, I would go up and down 4 times, telling myself every time that I wouldn't go back down again. right? The hallmark of addiction is denial. I was in total denial. I'm not going to go up and down again. That would be stupid. But then I would get up there and I would say, oh, I don't feel intoxicated enough, so I'm going to go back down, right? And that should have also, of course, been a sign that I was in total denial about my substance use. So then getting to the end of the summer, I was going back to school. It was senior year. It was the fall. It was the most important period in my life in terms of grades for college, doing college applications. And so I told myself I wasn't going to smoke marijuana, this semester. That would be that. I got to school, and of course, that didn't last long. I started doing it on weekends because, well, I don't have class on the weekends, right? Then I said, well, I have half day Wednesdays, so I can smoke it on Wednesday afternoon. You can probably see where this is going. And all of a sudden it's, well, I don't really care about math class that much. I'm just going to do it in math class, or I'm going to get high before math class. During that time, it was really damaging to me, not only just my academics, but that even aside, to my relationships, right? My friends that I was hanging out with, that I had been friends with for several years, who were really awesome and weren't substance users and were always super supportive and on the right track. A lot of them went to Ivy League schools and are doing amazing things today, and they're all still my friends. But I stopped hanging out with them. I stopped kind of caring about them because I only cared about people who would be able to help support my addiction. I would literally go around campus and beg people who had marijuana to rent me their vape pens for a night for $25. And that was, about the cost of a pen, or half the cost of a pen, depending on the size at that time, but just for one night. And then I would keep it to see how long I could get away with using other people's stuff with really no remorse, right? So that is how I spent that senior fall. And I kept kind of tumbling down and down and down. And my friends started to notice my free fall, really. I wasn't myself. I was acting totally differently. I just didn't have the confidence that I had. I just turned into a different person. And they held an intervention for me. They took my paraphernalia away. I broke into their dorm rooms and stole it back. That I didn't listen to them. I had some other random people kind of point out to me that it seemed like I was having an issue. I would argue with them that marijuana wasn't even addictive. It's just a plant. And then my friend called me one night and she said, Jordan, I think it's really time to start talking about quitting and not just slowing down. And that still in that moment didn't make me totally turn and realize that I needed to make a change. But there was one night where I remember looking at myself in the mirror. It was late at night. I was in my dorm room and I just had hollow eyes. I didn't see any life in my own eyes. I didn't really recognize the person looking back at me. I felt like my soul had really been ripped out by my use. That was a devastating feeling to me. It was probably the worst feeling that I've felt in my life. And it might have not been in that moment that I consciously made the decision to start turning things around, but certainly a seed was planted that my life wasn't working. Things weren't working. The lofty aspirations I had for myself, going to college, having a good career, having a family someday, those things were not compatible with the life that I was leading. And I was so lucky that I had parents and friends and a community that was really, really supportive. I knew that my mom would be there for me and be able to understand and to listen, and my dad and my friends, and that everyone would have my back in the case that I needed help. So I went home. I actually was anticipating going back to Spain for a semester abroad to study there in the winter. I decided I would kind of have a last hurrah and I would try and stop using. I lasted basically less than a day before I broke down, kind of crying like a baby, 17 years old, on my bed to my mom and telling her that I needed help. The next day, my parents got me into a rehab program, which I was totally startled by. I said, absolutely not. Like, what the heck? I was shocked when they told me that I couldn't drink alcohol anymore. I thought that it was just a marijuana issue. I didn't understand that it's kind of all connected. I was shocked when I learned that I wasn't going to be going abroad to Spain anymore, that I'd be taking a medical leave, right? All these things that I was in denial about, that I was like, whoa, I have consequences for my actions, right? But luckily, because of my family support and because of going to Narcotics Anonymous meetings and my great friends who have stuck by me, I was able to get into recovery at a young age and stick with it through college. And I went to American University. I studied political science. And during the summer before my freshman year, I got introduced to Kevin Sabet, who's the CEO of Smart Approaches to Marijuana. And I started interning interning with Sam in the fall of my freshman year of college. And I just never really left. I did other internships. I studied political science. I interned for Senator Chris Murphy from Connecticut and Congressman John Larson from Connecticut, and kind of explored different avenues, right? I had different options maybe of things that I could have done after I graduated, and I graduated in May 2023, so less than a year ago. But I decided that I wanted to stick with Sam, doing government affairs, federal affairs, really lobbying on marijuana and kind of educating people about the harms of marijuana, educating people about the pitfalls of marijuana legalization and how it's just an addiction for profit industry. And I was learning kind of about what I went through, even through my work, and getting more insight into that. And working at SAM was instrumental and has been instrumental in keeping me on the right path every single day. Working in this field of drug policy, I am reminded about the harms of use. I'm reminded that staying on the straight and narrow is the only way that I'm going to be able to have success and to lead the life that I want to lead. And, you know, today, the support of my parents, my girlfriend, my close friends, the team at SAM, it's indispensable to keeping me on that right track and making sure that I succeed and am able to achieve the things that I would like to achieve. And so I'm incredibly grateful to be in recovery in over 5 years, and to be also public kind of about my story and share my story with folks like you, with other young people, in the hopes that people can kind of get some inspiration or some insight. Because unfortunately, you know, the one thing that I've dealt with that's been the hardest in this journey has been the stigma, right? People don't seem to think that marijuana is addictive. People don't respect people who are public about their struggles. I've heard that I'm a paid actor. I've heard that I've been called horrible names on social media. And it's crazy, because imagine if you were public about your struggles with alcohol or with depression or bipolar disorder or, fentanyl use or anything else, right? Most people would be really sympathetic. It's not cool anymore to put stigma on people who struggle with mental health problems or addiction. But for marijuana, I think particularly because there's almost a cult-like reverence for it, and an industry that's trying to promote it and trying to make it legal, that's not okay. It's kind of the one isolated case in which people are still really stuck in decades old mentalities of having stigma towards mental health issues. And that's something that I try and combat every single day. So that is my story. That's what I went through and how I got to where I am today. And if any of you have any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer.
I know with this group, we're going to have plenty of questions.
So I have a question about the vape pens. Yeah, my son, my qualifier is 22 years old, and he went off to college and wound up mixed up with fentanyl and other substances. So he's sort of got multi-substance problems. He did use marijuana in the past, but then he moved on, obviously. But he still uses vape pens. And I don't, I've been lied to so much. As a parent, I don't know what's a vape pen and what's a vape pen. Like, what's a normal vape pen versus what's a vape pen with marijuana in it? How do we even know? And
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah. It can be really hard, right? I mean, when you're talking about vape pen versus a vape pen, I'm assuming you're talking about like just nicotine, right, versus marijuana. Oftentimes they look different. And I'd be happy to share any resources with folks who are interested.
Like,
The unfortunate.
If I see one that's round, like a round cylinder that's a vape,
Yes.
what is that?
That I can't say for sure, but I'd say it's most likely marijuana. It's most likely, if it looks like a pen, like it's skinny and long and cylindrical. One of the dead giveaways is if it's like that and the liquid inside is kind of a yellow or a brown, a darker brown, 99% confident that that's going to be marijuana. Right, if it looks like that.
So he told me that there's something out there that's like a form of marijuana that's not like the high level THC. It's like a step down, and you get it at smoke shops. So
Yes.
it's not really marijuana, so it's okay.
So
Could
I'm
you
assuming, are you
speak
talking
to
about
that?
Delta 8, perhaps? Have you heard that Delta
Yes,
8?
I
Okay,
think.
so
Could you
so
explain what that is?
yeah, absolutely. So I'm happy to explain. Delta 8, I will say, is one of the biggest, if not the biggest problems that I think we're seeing today, and I work on it every day. So the kind of brief overview is that in 2018, um, hemp was legalized. I think I just froze. I hope you can hear me. I'll try and
I can
unfreeze
hear
myself.
you.
Okay, great. I'll try and unfreeze myself. So hemp was legalized. So you can think of, there's the cannabis plant, and there are like two offshoots. There's hemp, and then there's marijuana. So Delta 9 THC is just the fancy name for the component in marijuana that gets you high. It's what we all know gets you high. THC, Delta 9 THC. 9 refers to the amount of isomers in the compound. Even at that point, you've kind of already lost me. I'm not a chemist, right? But just remember that that's the main compound. Now, in hemp, the selling point on hemp was you can actually grow hemp to use for clothing, for rope, for industrial purposes, and things like that. So Congress legalized it nationwide. What they didn't realize at the time was, and part of the purpose, right, is that hemp has just a very, very low Delta 9 concentration. So it's less than 0.3%. So it's incredibly low. There are some issues with that, but the main problem that people didn't realize is Delta 9 is not the only compound in marijuana that can get you high. There's things like Delta 8 THC and Delta 10 THC that are found in full bloom in hemp. So when we legalize that, we legalize these products that you can almost think of as sister compounds between THC. It's THC, but just kind of in a slightly different form. The impact is the same. It's still impairing, it's still intoxicating, it's still addictive. For all intents and purposes, it's marijuana. It's just now totally legal with no age restrictions, with no labeling requirements, zero regulation. And for 5 years, those products have been legal, and we've seen a dramatic increase in youth use of those products. And people think it's safer than marijuana because the industry says so, but we all know that that's not true. You can have psychosis from that. You can develop addictions. There's a 4-year-old in Virginia who died from eating Delta 8 gummies, actually. So this product, some people call it diet weed, but it really is kind of just the same thing as marijuana. Maybe it's falsely advertised as different, but it is. And I work every single day. It's one of my top 3 priorities this year to ban all of those products.
Thank you. I think there's something in the chat.
Yeah, there's someone in the chat who asked, can you talk more about the relationship between alcohol and pot? Yeah, sure. So, I think one of the obvious relationships, right, is that those are two of the substances that are most commonly used as, I guess, an initiator, right? It's the initial substance that people use. There's this whole argument, is marijuana or alcohol, are they gateway drugs, right? I think that conversation in those terms can be unhelpful because then you get into deep kind of political arguments and people are very entrenched in their opinions. The reality is this: having a glass of wine or drink or smoking a joint isn't going to make you have a physical craving for an opioid, for example. That's not how that works. But you are never going to start using fentanyl if you don't start with those products in the first place, right? So there's about a 44% correlation. So it's the R value in statistics. It's equals 44% with marijuana and alcohol and other illicit drug use, which is a moderately positive correlation, meaning that in terms of a gateway, it moderately, there's a positive correlation between that. So I think the more that we can discourage that, the better. And a final point, and I actually wrote a research paper on this in high school, and sorry, not high school, in college, which I got published in the American University Public Affairs Student Journal. People sometimes think that you can replace one with the other, right? That if we legalize marijuana, you will have lower rates of drinking because people are just going to transition from drinking alcohol to smoking marijuana. That is not true. We actually see increases in the simultaneous use of both, and that can be really, really dangerous, and even more dangerous than isolated use of one or the other on its own.
Cindy, did you have a question?
Yes. Could you talk a little bit about the differences between pot right off the plant, if you smoke it, versus what's in the vapes? Because am I correct that it's just so much stronger? And how do they make it so much stronger?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's much stronger. So when we talk about the THC potency, if you're talking about like botanically the marijuana plant, right? They call it the flower that has the THC in it. Botanically, the maximum amount of THC that even if you try and kind of pollinate these plants in a particular way or grow these plants in a way, the maximum amount you can get is about 35%. Right, for in a joint. That's, you're not going to get any higher than that. But what they do is they extract that THC and perform all these kinds of different processes. They compress it. They basically like press it down to make just a lot of THC in a small portion, right? And they make a resin out of it. They do all sorts of just crazy things to it, and they can make the dabs or the wax or the shatter or the concentrate. And so those can get upwards of 99%. Right, close to 100%. So it's kind of like the sky's the limit in terms of vape pens. Theoretically, you could have a vape pen that's only 5% THC. I don't think you're going to see that because there's not much demand for that, right? People want the higher potency stuff, but the sky's the limit. With regular flower, 35% is the limit. And let me be clear, 35% is outrageously high. Right, that is still outrageously high. The average THC potency in this is illegally seized samples by the DEA. So this doesn't even cover the legal market, which I bet the average is higher. And we're actually working on that at SAM, kind of analyzing that right now. We'll have a report in a few months about that. But in 1995, it was under 4% THC was the average. In 2021, in illicit marijuana, in the flower, not the concentrate, the flower, the average was above 15%. Right, so we're seeing a skyrocket, but the vapes, the sky's the limit, and that's why they're even more dangerous.
Thanks. I think there's another question in the chat, but one thing that I wanted to say is I've been to a dispensary, and it's probably instructive for anybody, to go to a Connecticut dispensary and then see that the kinds of flower that you're purchasing or the pre-rolled joints, average like 25, 28, 29% THC. I mean, I didn't see anything under the 20% that was being offered. But I think Val may have had a question. Would you want to ask your question, Val, instead of just in the chat?
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah,
great.
Sure, Paul. Hi, Jordan. My question just on the recovery side, because my son, and I'm sure you have the experience of, the resistance to thinking that the recovery is the same for THC versus other addictive substances. What do you have to say about the recovery path, and how hard is it to get off of THC versus what, maybe some information about other harder drugs,
Yeah. So, what I'll say about that is, I've spent a lot of time thinking about this, and I think part of this question is, what is the common thread, right, between people who are addicted to all variety of substances? Because you go in the rooms of these 12-step programs like AA or NA, right, and you hear these stories, and sometimes with young people, especially, you say, I can't relate to that. Then some 50-year-old who's just getting sober and is talking about his wife leaving him. Well, if you're 17, you're not going to be able to relate to that very much, right?
Exactly.
So I spend a lot of time, what are the common threads? And why do some people have really high bottoms and really low bottoms, but why am I still feeling in these meetings like what I'm hearing resonates with me, even though the content of the stories is different than the content of my life? And I think really the hallmark, I said this in what, kind of my, I guess, beginning presentation, that the hallmark of addiction is denial. Denial is the thread that links everything. And so what I've kind of come to the conclusion of over thinking about it, and this might just be me, someone else might disagree with that, and that's fine. But the bottom point, regardless of if it's getting in a car crash and killing someone versus, having your girlfriend just break up with you, right, because of your use, those things are very different kind of levels, right? But it is the point at which your bottom, you run out of fuel to kind of support your denial, right? Where you run out of gas on that, where there's nothing that you look at you in the face and you're like, damn, I have to really admit now that I'm kind of screwed, right? And I have a problem. And so I think, and so I hope this answers your question. With
Absolutely,
marijuana,
yes.
just like other drugs, and the hard, what I will say uniquely is tricky about marijuana. Find me one person in this country who will tell you fentanyl is not addictive. Find me one person in this country who will tell you alcohol is not addictive, that Xanax isn't addictive, right? That cigarettes aren't addictive. If I told you find me one person who said that cannabis or marijuana isn't addictive, I could probably find you 100 in about 5 minutes on social media, right? So that adds a whole nother layer to the denial thing because you're hearing so many mixed messages. So in my opinion, if you're a parent, the process of recovery can be slow. That is painful. For sure, that is painful to see. But if there's one thing you could do that's most important in the way that works best for your child or whoever you're supporting, it's to consistently feed messages to try and kill that denial. They say, no, I don't have a problem. Well, your actions are actually having this effect on other people. If you didn't have a problem and you're really convinced of that, yet half the people in your life are almost going to leave you and drop you, wouldn't you just give that up? If someone told me your hamburger eating was ruining your life, I don't like hamburgers that much to keep eating them, right? I don't like them that much. I would stop if that was really the case. But someone who's addicted would never stop, right? So like messages like that, I think can be very, very helpful. And that's kind of just my 2 cents.
Thank you.
I
think there was some more in the chat, Paul. I don't know.
Aileen, do you want to mention something? Describe it a little bit more, your question? Or we can just read it. Talk about the anxiety factor, the whole kind of co-occurring, and you were talking about it too, Jordan, about your anxiety as a young person.
Yeah, for sure. So, I think the kind of the comorbidities, I guess you could call it, right, of mental health issues with drug use is certainly something that's really, really common. And for me, a little bit deeper about the anxiety thing, right? Just like with any other substance, I felt like marijuana was curing it or fixing it, but really it was just a Band-Aid. Right. It was really just something that was going to come off. It was not actually healing me. Right. So over time, you wake up one day and you realize, wow, I still have my anxiety and now I've got a substance use disorder. Right. So you've got more things on top of that. That's something that I think a lot of people need to understand, that it's not going to be a fix. And, people might have different opinions on this, but I even think for medical marijuana markets, right, where states have legalized medical marijuana, anxiety and depression are 2 things that a lot of people can get marijuana for. Imagine if we had medical professionals saying, well, you should just drink alcohol for your anxiety, right? We know that, yeah, that might help for a little while, but it's not really going to fix your anxiety. You're just getting high and ignoring your problems. It's the same thing with marijuana. And then the end of that question was, how did you wean yourself off of it? So I personally went cold turkey. I just stopped. That worked for me. I was in a place where I had the support to also be able to kind of make that quick transition. I think I knew that for me, that was what I had to do. That might not be the case for others. There's not, one way to recovery. I think there's not one path to achieving recovery. Some people need to wean off of it, or, as long as that's a real plan. But I think abstinence should be the goal, though. Right. People say, oh, well, abstinence, doesn't need to be the goal. I mean, I think that should be the goal if you have an addiction. I think that's the only way to really achieve true recovery. I'm pretty firm in that. So whatever gets you to that place, I think is helpful.
And for you, you also mentioned community, how
Yeah.
a community of people was so important.
Yeah, absolutely.
This is Tiffany, Jordan's mom. Can I hijack your talk a little here, Jordan, and just add something about what you don't have to ever invite me again. When we went through this with Jordan, I'll just say, it for any parent out there dealing with this, you have to know or try to figure out, or it takes a lot of work, but what might work for your child. For Jordan, we had him in, first of all, outpatient at Silver Hill. And then we did 90-day program at NA. But when we finished up at Silver Hill, the psychiatrist there, Paul, you'll remember his name. I don't remember his name. He's not there anymore. He was great.
Dr. Douglas.
Dr. Douglas. And he said to my husband and me, you absolutely need to tie Jordan's recovery to college. And basically it was like, and our last meeting together as a family with Dr. Douglas, we said, Jordan, we're going to drug test you. We're going to because Jordan was also addicted to nicotine. So we're going to test you for nicotine. We're going to drug test you. And if you use drugs, alcohol, well, it's a drug. If you use any substances, we're not paying for your college. That doesn't work for every child. Okay. That worked for Jordan. Because I think he knew we were A, serious, and B, where was he going to find $65,000 a year to put himself through college? Not that that would be a deterrent if he chose another path, but I'm just saying for Jordan, that worked. I don't know, we're grateful and fortunate it worked. Doesn't work for anybody. It doesn't mean you're doing something wrong if it doesn't work. But that was just
Yeah,
sort
I
of
mean, there's a lot of evidence in the research to show it's interesting with addiction that money actually, there are studies that show people giving money as an incentive to stay off something. I mean, I'd be wary of that because I think that's
Oh,
in
yeah.
controlled settings with researchers, right? So like that's different, but it's just to kind of demonstrate. But I think it's probably more effective limiting finances, right? Limiting financial kind of gain and whatever that looks like, because addiction actually responds to that in cases. It's interesting because addiction is a disease, but like you could give someone with dementia all the money in the world and they're not going to remember your name, right? So addiction is a little bit unique in that way, but it's interesting because we just have more kind of tactics to be able to attack it.
Jordan, do you want
Thanks,
to
Ellen.
also, oh, sorry, I'm sorry. Go
What?
ahead.
Yeah.
No, I'm trying to, I don't mean to take over, but do you want to also talk about follow the money? Just, I don't know what the audience, who exactly the audience is, but just about like, the alcohol industry, Wall Street, all that, and the kind of social justice being
Yeah. If there's
a
time, I'm
little
happy
bit,
to do
yeah.
that, but I'll
Yeah,
answer other people's
okay.
questions first. Yeah.
Hi, Jordan. My name is Ellen Brzozowski. I used to work at Silver Hill. I'm a social worker. And so I really appreciate your talk and you sharing your story and your courage and just everything you're doing.
Thank you.
So thank you so much. But I actually knew Dr. Douglas when I worked at Silver Hill, and he used to provide this very, not complex, but it was a very medical reason or reasoning for why marijuana makes anxiety worse. And I can never remember all the details of it. But what would you say to somebody if they said to you, because there's a lot of young people that I work with who will say, oh, it makes me relax. It makes my anxiety better. And I know that it makes anxiety worse over time as people use it. But how do you get that across to people?
You agree with them? Yeah, I'm sure it does. I'm absolutely sure it makes your anxiety better. I 100% believe you. What I don't believe is that it will do that for a long time, right? It might make you feel better, but if you ask them like, okay, aside from this, what are the root of your anxiety? Let's say you get a kid to open up and say, I get bullied in school. Has the bullying stopped? No. Well, then do you really think that forever you're not going to feel anxious as long as the bullying is continuing? Like really, once you stop feeling as good, because you can explain to them like that's the way drug use works for a little bit, and you can say even if you're not addicted, right? Like but it's more, of course, if you are addicted, but you can kind of just bait them into it, right? Like you feel really great at first, and then you develop a tolerance or you get used to it, and it's not as good anymore. Have you ever done something in your life? The first time you ever threw a baseball and then you play for 10 years, maybe you're still as excited, but it's normal to you now, right? It's normal. Have you ever done something like that? Most people probably have experienced that, or you talk about a relationship with like it's really, things can be really exciting at first, or friendships really exciting to get to know someone, and then you're kind of just there with them, right? Or whatever that might be. Then the thing's going to creep back. Right. So like, I'd say like validate that, that they feel that way. That doesn't mean you're forever going to feel that way. And the research actually shows that you're not. And the experience of others are showing that you're not. And walk that through with them, that the root causes of their issues might not be going away.
Great. Thank you.
Hey, Jordan, it's Diane Chapman. How are you? I think your mom might have been alluding to this. I wonder if you could talk about how the growing trend of people saying, I'm not going to drink anymore. Alcohol's so bad for me. But hey, I'm going to just do something natural. I'm going to do, a bunch of marijuana, and I'm going to do shrooms and, you know, things like it's almost become sort of like a cult following, I feel like it's not cool
Yeah.
to drink anymore. I wonder how like Sam is taking that on.
Yeah, for sure. It's definitely a problem. You know, we're working with or working against an industry here that is using whatever to get people hooked. And the whole idea is that it's cool, right? Like that's how addiction for profit has always worked. Like Joe Camel and you know, smoking cigarettes, the Marlboro Man, like that's cool. Well, now it's trendy not to drink and to go all natural, right? Even though it's not necessarily natural. A lot of this stuff is sprayed with pesticides, and guess what? Heroin comes from poppy, which is a plant, and so is theoretically natural too. It doesn't really matter. But so, you know, it's definitely something difficult to combat. This might not be I don't know if this is a flashy answer, a unique answer, or something you were looking for, but you know, the two things: one, educating people that this is a tactic, a PR tactic by an industry that has a record of doing this with other drugs that they're probably more familiar with, you know, with cigarettes and things like that, right? So that's one thing, and then just educating people on the harms, because people also, I think part of it is I think most people aren't going to start doing something that they're convinced is really, really harmful to them. Some people might, but I don't think most people would. And so people start using marijuana and they don't think it's harmful at all. So, you know, educating people on those harms hopefully can combat, you know, any trendiness. Even if you look at other trends that you might think, well, that's harmful, like juuling, right, is like what a lot of kids got into and things like that. Well, the argument at the time was it's way better than cigarettes. Right. So they did think it was good for you and it was trendy. Right. So there are all these things you kind of have to pair those two things together. Or Delta 8, we're seeing increase. I talked about that before. Well, that's just diet weed. That's like not really the same. It's less. Right. So it's better for you. It's always, I think, subtly paired with, well, this isn't going to harm me. And so convincing people that it will harm you is crucial, is actually really crucial.
And most THC products are really the result of chemistry, not botany. I mean, the products that they create, like you were saying, squeezing the most THC out, that they actually use a chemical process to do that.
Yeah. Synthetic for sure.
Hardly natural.
Hardly natural, right? Hardly natural at all.
But nobody believes that. It is nutty.
No, they don't.
Hey, Jordan, I'm wondering about how, if Sam gets involved with, you know, I don't know if they can do this, with how substance use and all the harms involved are presented in schools. Because the one memory I have from high school is we had some sort of health class where they gave us, it was one of those newsprint booklets that literally talked about every single type of drug out there. And it explained what it was, explained how you did it, explained what the, you know, risks were, you know, mushrooms, LSD, you name it. And it just was straight on honest about it, as opposed to hiding it and saying, yeah, this is what happens. You know, you get addicted. And it scared the bejesus out of me. After reading that, I never wanted to do any of those drugs. So it's a little bit to your point about being forthright with people about marijuana and the risks of marijuana, because people just don't think there are risks there. I mean, are we reaching the children, you know, young people at the right age?
Yeah, no, we're not. We're not.
You know, and is there any way to do that? And is that something that Sam looks at? So thanks for taking that question.
Yeah, no. So you're totally right. We're not doing that. A few layers to that. One, you know, people say, just say no and dare and stuff. People basically, you know, their main critique of that is now that it's almost cringy if you actually ask people to show data on whether that was effective or not. And, you know, campaigns, anti-drug campaigns, they don't really have anything. What we actually saw is in the 1980s, there was a very steep decline in adolescent drug use that has not been replicated ever since. But people think like that are teenagers or adults. That's a little bit cringy, the egg in the frying pan. This is your brain on drugs. But like for kids who are really young, they might be targeted by that industry, but I don't know that they're old enough to understand those social norms of like what is cringy or not, or, what do people really think about these substances in a really thought out way. And so I think the younger we can get to kids with that kind of education, the more formative it's going to be. I don't think we're putting ourselves in the shoes of a of a fifth grader when we're actually thinking about this, right? In terms of what we can do, there are bills out there which I've lobbied for and Sam supports, right? There's one actually that got, I think it was introduced today, actually, a bipartisan bill to increase the education of block grants for fentanyl education in public schools, things like that. One thing that I think people aren't aware of is at its peak, our federal government spent $195 million on funding youth anti-drug media campaigns, right? $195 million. 10 years ago, basically when things started getting really, really bad, we zeroed that out. There's no money. Congress eliminated all funding for that. So, even though it's in the Office of National Drug Control Policy and like the executive branch's mandate to be able to implement those kinds of programs, at the time where we have social media and we see more and more kids getting drugs on social media and seeing pro-drug kind of messages on social media, we have reduced by about 200 million to zero the amount of money we're spending on educating kids on that. So it's tragic and it's inexcusable. And so those are the kinds of things Sam talks about and works on to try and fix.
I have a question. Paul, sorry, it's Laura. I'm sorry I'm so dark. I'm sitting outside of a volleyball practice in my car. But I've heard a lot about sort of THC carts being laced with fentanyl and, kids, younger teens buying these carts in like smoke shops, like really like off-brand carts from China and it's pretty scary. And so, I'm just wondering how frequently that happens. And I mean, I don't want my kids to use THC at all, but I also think about like harm reduction and if they are to use, especially my 19-year-old, is there a way to use more safely so that these products aren't laced with fentanyl, for example?
Yeah, so that's something you hear a lot, and I'm kind of torn on its use in terms of just like a messaging, because it gets a lot of people talking about marijuana where they didn't before. It may happen, but the truth is that actually really rarely happens. There's actually a list on some website where you can see all the articles saying someone died of a fentanyl-laced marijuana cart and then the retraction of that article. I actually learned this at Silver Hill. This was really explained to me in a comprehensive way. The economics of drug dealing and the drug trade and of drug use really prevent fentanyl-laced marijuana from being something that's real. It's really kind of a scare and something that's hyped up. The reason is, if you think about it, and I saw a comment, carts are the same thing as cartridges. Yes. So if you see, the average marijuana user, let's say like a high schooler, right? Let's say there are several drug dealers in the town who are selling marijuana to kids in high school or in college. 99% of those kids at that point in their lives, that they're just marijuana users, are not going to be looking to use fentanyl. So if one of those dealers is selling a kid fentanyl-laced marijuana and he dies, strong majority of those people are never going to go to that drug dealer again, because they probably don't want fentanyl at that point. They probably don't want to die of fentanyl. So it really would actually be horrible for the dealers to sell those kids. Now, if you're using heroin and you're at that kind of point where you're using opioids, lacing it with fentanyl, you get more bang for your buck, because those people are usually, especially if you're that addicted, you're so low on money as well. It actually attracts more people to those dealers, the more people they've killed through drugs, because they're selling the most high potency stuff. So it's the best bang for their buck as an addict. So that really doesn't happen. And then the other thing I would say is people who talk about that, it leads into the trap of the full legalizers, because if you say, well, we need to cut down on fentanyl-laced marijuana carts, which don't really exist anyway, the legalizers are going to say, that's a fantastic point. That's exactly why we need to legalize and regulate marijuana. Right? That's exactly why we need to have dispensaries where we know what's in the products and we can ensure fentanyl isn't there. Thank you for bringing up that point. That's what they're going to say, even though they know that doesn't really happen. So that would be my response to that. I'm not saying if this has happened to someone you know, or if a loved one, that it hasn't never happened. I'm not saying that at all. But the rate at which people perceive it does is not, I don't think, reflective of reality.
Thank you.
Hey, Jordan, I wanted to ask you, in terms of the consequences, you get all the time that the legislators going, tell me about all the people that died from THC. And, they're trying to get you to say, no, I guess there haven't been any. But I think I've heard Kevin say the number of hospitalizations now, people going to the emergency room for cannabis-induced psychosis, or the number of people coming to the emergency rooms for cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome.
Yep.
What are the ones that you talk about, the consequences that really are devastating for young people and everyone?
Well, first of all, that kind of notion that you can't even die or overdose anymore, that's being disproven now. There have been several toxicology reports and autopsy reports. I talked about a 4-year-old in Virginia who died from Delta-8 gummies that have shown that people are actually dying solely of the use of those substances of marijuana, probably in particularly highly potent forms. Look, you can die from a marijuana intoxicated driver hitting your car, right, and killing your family. That happens. Right? You can die from suicidal ideation as a result of, especially high potency marijuana use. You can die of, suicide by, because of the psychosis that comes along with that. You can die from cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome, CHS, which for anyone doesn't know, I'm sorry for the graphic details, but it's basically when you nonstop vomit and you die of dehydration. And the only way to stop the vomiting is to actually totally stop the marijuana use. You can die from that, right? There are all different ways that marijuana is really, really, really harmful. I'd say one of the other things is just the addiction. People don't understand, even if they acknowledge that marijuana is addictive, I don't think they understand truly how addictive today's marijuana is. So it used to be about 1 in 10. Now the CDC and the National Institutes of Health estimate it's more around 30% addiction rate for marijuana. And it's just increasing, as the stuff gets more potent and more popular. I don't think most people understand that either. And that's obviously a really scary statistic.
And one other thing about the black market, the one rationale for having legalization is that, the product is pure, the product is good, and the black market will go away. And states like California and Colorado, what are you seeing?
Yeah, well, we're saying that the black market is not going away at all. 75% of the marijuana sold in California is sold on the black market, despite the fact that they've legalized marijuana for several years. And in most states, it's around or above 50% of the market is the black market. And what happens is the people in charge of the governments really kind of do a sleight of hand, right? They say, you're going to vote for this ballot measure because we're going to promise you that we're going to tax the crap out of it, and we're going to fund our schools and pave our roads and fund addiction treatment. And so you say, hey, okay, I'm going to vote for that. And then what you see is the reality is, of course, the more expensive it is on the legal market, people are just going to go to their dealer who they might have had for 20 years, right, to get the same marijuana that they've had because it might be half the price. So then the state government needs to bail out the marijuana industry. And part of that, this happens in California time and time again, is that they say, well, the way that we can save this industry and make sure the black market goes away is if we now cut all those taxes. And so all of a sudden you get people voting for something because they think it's going to fund their schools. And then you take that away and then you don't have that extra money. This has happened in concrete situations and it's been devastating. In Colorado, for example, I think it was a homeless shelter that relied 100% on the cannabis taxes from Colorado. And when they dipped lower than expected, they had to shut down.
Any other questions?
One more question. Are there any tests for sobriety for driving? I know, Colorado said they were going to come up with something back when they legalized. And as far as I know, there's still no way to prove that somebody's driving under the influence of THC, correct?
Yeah, so the issue is you can test for THC, but it stays in your system for several weeks. So you don't know, they could have smoked 2 weeks ago and then drove, and obviously they weren't under the influence then. So there's no way to make a positive determination. And that's obviously a huge issue.
Mm-hmm. I understand what has happened though in states like Colorado is insurance rates have gone up just because that, there's no way to police it. So there are more car accidents and fatalities.
Yes, unfortunately, yes.
Anyone else with a question before we wrap up?
I see one last quick one that I can address very quickly. Is CBD safer than THC? CBD was made fully legal as a result of the Farm Bill, so it's fully legal. CBD is not intoxicating. It doesn't get you high, so it's not addicting. There's some evidence that it can cause some damage to some organs. Is CBD good for you? Probably not. Is it not really in the same league as THC? No. So we spend our efforts on the things that we can, really focus on, which is THC. I would compare CBD to like a snake oil salesman, right? They're just going to tell you, oh, it's going to fix your arthritis. And it's not probably really going to do that. It's not great for you, but it's not going to get you intoxicated or anything. So in that way, I guess it's better.
Right. It's not addictive. Well, I think this is a good place to cut it off, and I was hoping that maybe you would join me in thanking Jordan for your outstanding presentation today.
Thank you so much for having me on, Paul, and for everyone for staying with us. I know it's late and listening to my story and asking the really good questions you guys have asked tonight.